So today we're going to be continuing our discussion of Crooked Cucumber, Chapter 6, and the beginning of Chapter 7, just because I don't want to leave you in a state of war. So Chapter 7 is about the end of the war. So we started this discussion last week, and I think most of you were there. If for any reason you were not there, I put the YouTube link in the chat that will take us to our new Kannon YouTube channel. It's also in the email that I sent out to the Sangha, so you can feel free to catch up if you haven't already. All right, so how this works is this is a book discussion where we'll take turns. Anyone can volunteer. I'll probably put most people on mute, or let's see how we want to do it. Or I can just leave you unmuted, and if you're in a noisy area, you can mute yourself. About that. So we'll be reading the sections that are highlighted only, and there will be a few discussion questions that I'll ask, and then anyone can answer or also give general comments about the section, what's coming up for them. And that's how we'll do this session. Okay, so any questions before we get started?
This is Ross. So you're saying that there's the sections are highlighted and there's like an email I can find a link to it?
Yes, but I'm actually, what might be easier right now is I'm going to share my screen with the word, so I think it'll be easier to follow along. And I did notice that the last attachment, I highlighted one additional small section from the last time that we did this, and I noticed it didn't come out in the email attachment for some reason.
You want to turn on the lights? We can turn on the lights.
Okay.
So anyway, I think the easiest way to follow along is going to be, I'll share my screen, and then anyone can just start reading the section, and we'll just take turns reading sections and answering questions. So we'll read the sections, and then I'll stop sharing so that we can see each other for the discussion part for answering questions.
Great.
Okay, so yeah, let me just share my screen then.
Straight then, you had it in your hand.
I did. Oh, and just so you know, all of you are not on mute, so we can hear everything. So if you want to be on mute, you can mute yourself. Otherwise, we will hear you, just like in reality. Okay, sorry, let me find. No, that's the Doan book. Got a lot of things open. Here we go. Here's the book. Okay.
What page is it, Bonnie?
In the physical book or in the handout?
Physical book.
Physical book.
113.
Okay. 113.
Okay.
Yeah, 113. Let me see. Okay. So can everyone see this pink highlighted section?
A little bit.
Do I need to zoom in or out, or let me just see.
Good.
Looks good to me.
That's
To
okay.
the left. To the left.
Oh, yeah. It was good.
That
For
good?
the war
It's
situation.
good now.
Yeah, that's okay.
A little, no, it's, it was good the first time you posted it.
Okay, let me zoom out then, because sometimes you're seeing multiple things, like you're able to see the chat and the videos and everyone at once. So can everyone see this pink square where it says section 4?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Okay, so that's where we're going to start reading. So anyone can start.
Okay, you want me to start?
Go ahead, Umar.
Okay. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage, were the first words hinting with a colossal understatement at the intent of the message. The enemy has begun to employ new and most cruel bomb whose power to do damage is indeed incalculable. Taking the toll of many innocent lives, the emperor said that Japan had accepted the Potsdam Treaty. Should we continue to fight, it would not only result in the ultimate collapse and the obliteration of the Japanese nation, but it would also lead to the total extinction of the human civilization. The emotional core of the emperor's pronouncements sank into the hearts of the nation. We are keenly aware of the inmost feelings of all of you, our subjects. However, it is according to the dictate of time and fate that we have resolved to pave the way for a grand peace for all generations to come by enduring the unendurable and suffering what is insufferable. As the last words of the emperor's voice echoed through the halls of the Rinzo in Shunryu, and his family wept openly, so many feelings, so much loss. Tori's husband, Chi's brother had died, as well as Shunryu, some of Shunryu's students, and sons of friends and Danka. And now the empire was dead. Japan was crushed and charred.
So this is the emperor announcing over loudspeakers to everyone that they're surrendering during World War II. And there's been all of this talk about the evil Americans, and not only that, but we also just dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So that's what prompted the surrender. So that's what's going on in this part. So there's been so much loss, a lot of sacrifice, a lot of people going to war, and now Japan has lost the war. So then let's start with Inyaizu. Sorry, it's a little blurry because I had my post-it there. So
Just have a question here. Has anybody been to the memorial on Hiroshima in Japan?
Yes, I have been there.
Me too. Me too. It's very illuminating. There's a big discrepancy between the American history and the Japanese history on the
Oh, yeah.
dropping of the atomic bomb,
Yep.
which I can get into later.
Yeah, let's don't let us forget to discuss that. Maybe after we read this section.
Of course.
Like if you have comments on that, I'd be very curious to hear about what it was like to be there and what it said.
Sure.
It was horrible, one word I can put.
Yeah.
It was very moving, yeah.
What's the next one that we're reading, Bonnie?
It's okay, sorry, what page is it? In the book it's 114, but it's the second to last paragraph. It says in Yaizu, many people were panicking.
Okay. Somebody has to pick this up then.
Sure.
Can I do it?
Go ahead.
Yeah, do it.
In Yaizu, many people were panicking, burning records in homes, businesses, and its city hall. There was even an attempt to torch the building itself. The Americans were coming, and people feared that anything they had done might be used against them. Lists would be compiled, and the soldiers would go from home to home, executing them. Of the survivors, men would become slaves, and women would be raped. In Okinawa, hundreds of women had jumped off cliffs rather than face the invaders. The Americans had been called beasts and demons for so long that ordinary people were in terror. In meetings on the streets and in the temple, Shunryu urged them to be calm and not to worry.
So continuing, he had always said.
Okay. He had always said it wasn't only foreigners who would be devils. Those among us who need to call them that may be the devils, the enemy. He encouraged people not to worry about the Americans. They are people just like us, and they will understand us. I didn't really know anything about America or other countries, but I had confidence in human nature, and that human nature is the same wherever we go. I'd always express these sorts of views in my lectures or when students came. I had been criticized, but I hadn't been acting officially. It was just my opinion.
Thanks, Jaya. So a couple questions, but of course the section is open to whatever comments. And Mike, I'd like to hear about your perspective as well from visiting the memorial sites.
Of course.
But the questions are, what effect does the polarizing extremist propaganda have on public welfare? And what effect does spiritual practice have on our state of mind and perspective? And also I want to add that actually a lot of people were, this section I didn't have us read. Actually, maybe let me read it a little bit, just because you brought up the memorial. So a lot of people in Japan, when the Americans won the war, or basically had dropped these bombs, they were freaking out, and they basically were afraid that they'd be punished even for honoring the Japanese soldiers who fought in the war. And despite Shunryu Suzuki being a person of peace, being against the war, he was against the war, you know, although he didn't declare it too openly, but he just kept talking about how much better Japan could do if there was peace. But he had such an honor for life that when everyone else was too afraid to honor these dead Japanese soldiers, Shunryu said, I'll honor them. So I'm just going to read it because you mentioned it, and it's on the same page. The locals feared they'd be punished, whereas if they destroyed it, talking about the memorials, then the Americans would be pleased because we're destroying records of our own, you know, our own soldiers. Carry it to my temple then, Shunryu said to them. I will protect it as long as I'm alive, and I will take all the responsibility for any damage done by the Americans to this memorial. So the Chukoni was moved to a spot in front of Rinzo Inn, and Shunryu held a service there for the war dead and enshrined it. Then everyone waited for the Americans. So this is amazing because people are so furiously fighting this war when they believe Japan is winning. And as soon as they declare defeat, they don't even want to honor their dead because they're acting out of fear. And Shunryu's not acting out of fear. He's both not wanting the people to have gone to war and died, but because they did, he's going to honor their lives and their memorial. It's a very interesting perspective he has. So yeah, these are the questions about propaganda, spiritual practice, points of view, perspective, and yeah, but it's also open for discussion.
Yeah, well, I think aside from propaganda, there might be some revisionist history going on. I went to the Yakasuni Shrine in Tokyo, and they have an interesting take on the whole war. It's the Yakasuni Shrine is where they honor the warriors of Japan who fought in former wars, and it's a very controversial shrine because whenever the Prime Minister of Japan visits there, China and Korea get up in arms because they think they're celebrating the warriors who attacked the Chinese and the Koreans and committed the genocide. Excuse me? This is the Yakasuni Shrine.
Yeah, that's just background noise, I think. Sorry.
Okay, so what the Yakasuni Shrine, what they say about the war with the Americans is that it was the oil embargo from the Americans that caused the Japanese to attack in Pearl Harbor, or that caused the whole war in the first place. That's what they say. That's what it is, the official line in the Yakasuni Shrine.
What do you mean oil embargo? Can you explain?
Yes. Because Japan had sort of expanded its sphere of influence with, I believe it was the Pacific Co-Prosperity Sphere, and they were being very militaristic. The oil embargo, what they were sort of allied with Nazi Germany, and the oil embargo was initiated to sort of stop their aggression, so to speak. It was because Japan and Nazi Germany were allied, and Franklin Roosevelt sort of initiated this embargo because Japan and the United States were sort of on very hostile terms, but war had not been declared yet. But what the Americans say is that it was a sneak attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii that caused the war. And World War II, the declaration of war against Japan, is one of the only wars that has been actually an official war authorized by Congress. So there's a discrepancy in the narrative about what started the war. With regard to what we were talking about earlier, about the atomic bomb dropping, there's also a discrepancy in the narrative. What they say at the Hiroshima nuclear bomb shrine is that Japan was already on its knees. They were right about to surrender, and there was no warning about these nuclear bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Absolutely no warning. So what they say is the whole bombing was completely unnecessary. It was basically a tactic that the Americans used to make sure that they took over Japan instead of the Russians. That's what they say.
Well, yeah, I also know this, but they needed to test their bombs because they were testing it in New Mexico, so they needed to test it somewhere, so they used Japan to drop the bombs.
That's what they say, yes.
Yeah.
They say that Japan didn't get a warning. They dropped
Right.
the bombs. They dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and without a warning.
Yeah.
That was completely unnecessary because Japan was
Yeah,
already going
that's
to surrender. That's what the Japanese say
Yeah.
at the Hiroshima Memorial. What the Americans say, what we learned in history, is that Japan was ready for a fight. They had been pushed back to mainland Japan, and a full-scale invasion of mainland Japan would have cost hundreds of thousands of American lives and Japanese lives. So they did a utilitarian calculus, and they said, well, the bombs would kill this many people, but a full-scale invasion would kill a lot more people. So we should drop the bombs to save lives. That's what the Americans say. Japan wasn't ready to surrender. Japan was ready to fight till the end.
And I've heard even something slightly different but similar, which was that the Americans dropped the bombs at once because they wanted to make Japan surrender. So that goes along with the American story, but that
The Soviet Union, yeah.
But that they were afraid of, like they only had 2 bombs was the story. And so that they wanted to drop them both at once because then they wouldn't know how many they had. So I heard something like that. I don't know if it's true. So the hard thing is that we're going to get a lot of different perspectives. And you're right that there's also propaganda on every country's side as well. So not only does Japan have propaganda, US has propaganda, and then there's also individual stories. I think one thing that's interesting though is as much as there might be this propaganda and this kind of unified nation mindset, if you look at history, you can see there were people on all sides that were acting either really brutally, really cruelly, or trying to make things better, right? And I mean, in Japan, we have Suzuki Roshi, who's really advocating for peace and trying to, be peaceful while supporting his country. And we also have the Japanese that, did the rape of Nanking, which was complete brutality to the Chinese, right? And they carry a lot of guilt for that. So that happened with the Japanese leadership, that there were this polarization. Similarly, I'm sure we had it in the US. I'm sure we had it in every country. Even if you look at Nazi Germany itself, the crazy insanity of like sadistic behavior that was going on, and cruelty and genocide. And yet there were also individuals that were risking their own lives, being German, like blue-eyed, blonde-haired, and were risking their own lives to help those less fortunate and hide them. So, it's like at the end of the day, we're all responsible for our own actions, but it's really hard when the leadership and the consequences of acting outside the leadership could result in death or annihilation or oppression or torture. It's really tough. But I think that in every single country that was in World War II, there was a polarization. There was the extremely powerful, aggressive, power hungry, and then there were good people trying to do the right thing in really difficult circumstances.
Well, I wanted to make a point that there was a study done to kind of try to understand the Nazis and why people carried out these terrible things. And it's a study where basically they ask a teacher to administer shocks to somebody, and then the person screams, and they keep asking them to administer the shocks, and they, on average, people do it because they're told. And so I think that one thing specifically about Buddhism that I appreciate is that we are allowed to question this kind of the status quo. And so
Absolutely.
maybe as like a human, it's kind of maybe human nature not to really question things sometimes, and that's where things get kind of dangerous.
Yeah, super dangerous not to question things. Because, oh man, there's this amazing quote. I wonder if I can find, I think it's even in these, somewhere in these chapters we're reading. And Suzuki Roshi says, I think it's in this chapter, Wartime, like, if someone lies to you, basically it's unfortunate, but if you lie to yourself, it's catastrophic.
Mm-hmm.
So when we, like, I don't remember the exact words he used, but it's something like that. So sometimes we're limited and our hands are tied with how much we can do, but at least questioning the status quo, at least seeing things clearly for what they are, rather than always relying on someone else to tell us what is the history book, what is the truth, what is reality. To question that, say, well, that's one perspective. Is that maybe there's other perspectives that could give me a whole.
There's always going to be multiple perspectives, and there's not a right and wrong. Two people can have different perspectives and both be right.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Well, but the truth is truth, you know.
I
There
think
is
there
still
can be
truth.
more than one truth, but
Well, you know, there is a lot of evidence that has come up even in America that what's his name that was speaking in the beginning, that there is absolute evidence that there was no need to drop the bombs.
So there's a few things.
You know?
One is one of perspective, that there's my truth and your truth. And then there's another thing, which is lies, right? That's a different thing. That's when someone is sending out a message that they know is false, that they know is not true, but they're doing it because their objective is, you know, to gain power or influence or divide and conquer or whatever it is, cause panic, right? So that's where we need to practice our awareness to develop discernment and see, are we seeing things from all different perspectives, and also which perspectives might be being put out there that are not even that person's true perspective, but are with an agenda behind it.
So there is, since we're discussing this, Kurosawa made a great movie called Rashomon. I think it was in the 60s. So this is what Rashomon was about the different perspective. It wasn't what happened in the movie, but he was really alluding to the bigger situation, how Japan saw the war, how America saw the war, how even after that movie, he was actually labeled by the Japanese people as being a Westerner. And so he had a very humanist point of view. So if you get a chance, do see that movie again after this, I think, discussion. It will resonate even more.
Rashomon is a very powerful production. I could go off. If I start talking about Rashomon, I'm going to go off, and that's all we're going to discuss tonight.
No, don't do that.
But long story short, I was in a play, the play Rashomon. It was adapted to be a theatrical production, and I was a lead in that play. So I actually acted out the different perspectives, and it was a pivotal moment in my life, actually. So I mean, for people who don't know the play, it's basically a story about a murderer who comes and he, you know, kills a man and takes the woman, but then they break it down because it's a court trial and everyone's telling the story from their own perspective, and they're all completely different of what actually happened. And then at the end, you finally find out that the one that's probably the most true was there was a bystander that was not even in the scene standing nearby, and it was actually almost comical, because you want to believe that there's great villains and great heroes, but really a lot of it was kind of accidents and miscommunication and petty stuff that people were fighting over, and that turned out to be the one that was actually closest to reality. It was not that anyone was pure evil or pure good. In fact, Tajumaru, who was the villain, was actually trying to make himself sound a lot tougher than he really was. I mean, that's a great production by Kurosawa on perspective. That may be another topic we could do.
Actually, you guys talk about Japanese and American this nuclear bomb. Actually, in China, there's a different version of the story. So you know what I mean? It's like, oh my God, and then we've been educated like that way, and honestly, until this point, I have no idea what's happening. But actually, I think today, something very critical. Actually, I'm so curious about Suzuki Roshi is, there's a spiritual leader in China, Dalai Lama, right? Has been,
In Tibet.
the government doesn't allow he get in the country. And the Vietnam spiritual leader, which is Han, he was like, he can't get into Vietnam. He has to live in France. So, and then Suzuki is something different, right? They all want the peace, right? Even Dalai Lama, even his life has been I don't know how CCP did to him, but he chose to forgive. He chose to have compassion, and then but they all leave their hometown. But Suzuki seems to live in Japan. What happened to him? They all spiritual leaders. They all love peace, and they all had good tough times. And then how come Suzuki Roshi be able to stay in Japan, still quietly, promote peace, promote this unconventional truth, which is nobody want to hear. Especially we all like governed by, this emotion and then propaganda, and then sometimes if you are in it, it just hard to be able to
Bunny, I'm sorry, I need to leave at this point. I need to work on something.
No problem, Eleonora. We're actually recording this session, and it'll be posted and
Bunny,
send out the link. Yes. So
I'm going to leave now.
okay, you can watch the rest of the session later. Okay, bye.
Yes, I need to work on something, and it's getting late. So I'm so
Don't
sorry. I
worry.
need to leave.
No
Okay,
worries.
bye everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Bye everybody.
Hey, to answer, so I asked the same exact question to Les a few months ago at Starbucks, because I said, look, so many people who have promoted peace have been assassinated. Martin Luther King, Jesus Christ, like it just goes on. JFK, Mahatma Gandhi. Yeah, I think we mentioned all of these names. We were like, well, Mother Teresa kind of made it through, but she had a little bit different.
the only woman.
Well, but then I said, but one person I thought of that made a really big difference when it came to peace, and who for some reason was not assassinated, was Suzuki Roshi. So my question to Les was, why was Suzuki Roshi not assassinated? And and what he said was, he never became a political figure. He chose to lead in a very quiet way, like establishing Tassajara, working hand in hand with his students. He was a very humble person, and he didn't really put it in your face. Like, I think he knew better than to try to convert people to his way of thinking that weren't ready for it. So
to tell you the truth, I think that's a very Japanese thing.
Could be.
They're very polite, or I don't know, I shouldn't say that, but that's my take.
Yeah, so he had a much quieter way of standing for peace. And what Les said is that people saw what he was doing, but if they didn't like it or agree with it, they would just say, oh, that's stupid, that's dumb. But they didn't see him as a threat. So because Suzuki Roshi was very conscientious not to be perceived as a threat, or to outright speak out in a way that people would see him as a threat, it's why he wasn't targeted, and yet he lived for so many years to lead so many people to peace and start so many things. So I thought that was very interesting perspective. Okay, well, it is almost 8:30, so I want to move on to the next sections. Before we move on, though, I just want to point out this one thing, that all of this stuff had been about the Americans and how they were going to they were going to enslave the men and rape the women and be these really brutal human beings. And the result is that many people, hundreds of women, jumped off of cliffs. So what's happening in Japan is people are committing suicide at this news. So I just want you to think of what is the power of this story. And as we know that some of the perpetrators of the war, the Japanese war, initiators, were actually enslaving who? If you remember from the first session, they were enslaving the Koreans, and they raped a lot of the Chinese. So a lot of times these cruel kind of dictator leader people that are pushing for war will project their own cruel actions on other people. That's not to say that America was all innocent by any means. There was the bomb. So just want to clarify that. But this happens a lot. Like if you look at what happened in the Congo and the colonization that happened there, they were cutting off hands and feet of children and doing really cruel things. And this was the Belgians that were doing this. And most of the Belgians had no idea. It was the leadership, right? King Leopold. And then Belgians started having nightmares about their own children being missing hands and feet. So a lot of times that guilt of what has been done comes back to karmically kind of haunt us. And just to be clear, I'm not painting the US in perfect light. We have a lot of our own demons. I mean, with the enslavement of African Americans and also, with the bombs. So we have our own karma that we're working through in the United States as well. But just wanted to point this out, that this kind of demonization of Americans, this story resulted in a lot of people in Japan committing suicide upon the surrender.
You guys already talked about the philosophy of the Tojo War Kannon, or the people who are militaristic in Japan last session? I wasn't here.
No.
Oh, you didn't? Okay. It's just interesting to me because Japan has a Zen Buddhist tradition, which seems anathema to warfare, and Shintoism. I don't know very much about it, but I think that would be not conducive to warfare and violence. So I don't know what the justification for the rape of Nanking or these militaristic actions were. I don't know, and I always wanted to.
Well, I think setting Japan aside, from a human perspective, this is a global problem, that when people are pushing for war, whatever religion they claim, they're probably not truly religious. A lot of people exploit religion and do things even in the name of religion, start wars in the name of religion, but are they truly like really spiritual seekers? Maybe not. Like even a lot of the colonization and the Crusades, there were people that talked about the 11 commandments. They took the Bible and they said, oh, there's 11 commandments, and the 11th one is you have to obey our king because he is next to God, right? So people distort religion when it's convenient. And the people who were truly Shinto, the people who were deeply practicing Zen, were not the ones leading the war. Just like probably people who deeply practice any religion, Christianity, Islam, like, unless it's maybe a religion that advocates for war, but most religions on some level advocate for peace. So I think that paradox and contradiction exists in every country because it's a struggle within humanity itself, Okay, so let's move on to section 5. And who would like to read? All right, a chat. Okay, sorry, I'll have to check that later, so I'm not blocking the screen. When you look at human life carefully, sorry, this is the beginning of chapter 7, because like I said, I don't want to leave you in the war chapter.
So, okay, I can read that.
Okay, go ahead, Lee.
When you look at human life carefully, you will find out how important it is to become a trustworthy person. The American soldiers came and proved not to be devils. The Japanese forces were allowed to disarm themselves, and the Japanese civil authorities were given the power to administer the nation under the watchful eye of GHQ, General Headquarters, the American Army of Occupation.
So,
But there, oh, go.
oh, actually, you can read maybe the first couple sentences of this. Yeah.
Okay, but there was a new war. The enemy now was starvation. Food was scarcer than ever, and the harvest had been poor.
Great.
Temple. Okay, go on.
Okay, then we're gonna go to, sorry, I don't know if you can see my screen or not.
Tarot, starting with tarot.
Sure, you can do that. Yeah, the last paragraph of the next page.
Okay, Taro suggested that his father could easily get Shunryu a government job, which would provide money to buy food and to pay off some of the temple's debts. But Shunryu would not consider such a thing. A number of priests were working to support their temples and families, going off in Western suits and shined shoes, but not he. He was testing Dogen's teaching. Dogen had said that when we are supported firmly from within, external support follows. Every morning in Soto temples, a priest chanted a brief dedication that included the line, may the two wheels of the temple gate turn smoothly forever. The two wheels of the temple are the Dharma wheel and the economic wheel. Dogen said that the former turned the latter. So if the temple went broke or the people starved, it would likely be because their Dharma was weak.
Okay, so then continuing in the next page, ever since I first knew.
Okay, did you want me to continue?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, ever since I first knew the world of Dogen Zenji, I tested my belief that if I observed the Buddhist way faithfully, I would be supported. This was true during and especially after the war, when there was not enough to eat. Japan and Dogen's hypothesis got a nudge of support from America when shiploads of food started to arrive at the docks, feeding the faithless and faithful alike. Among the foodstuffs were powdered milk, which was a curious drink, and hard, dried fruit. Chie encouraged her children to eat this strange food by telling them things like, "Prunes make you beautiful." Okay.
Then you can skip the next paragraph if you want. And
then
so the early days.
Start in Tokyo or?
So the early days.
Okay. Okay, so the early days of the occupation passed, and the nation was grateful to the victors for their magnanimity. People weren't being rounded up and shot. They had their emperor and their own government. There were shiploads of food, and in general, the militarists had been exposed for their great lies and barbarism. Indeed, the whole world had been turned upside down. Everything was the opposite of what they'd been taught for decades.
All right, thank you. So, yeah, not to dismiss the damage we did with the atomic bombs, right? But this points out that this is actually Shunryu Suzuki's recollection. This is a Japanese perspective, which is that the people that actually came in to occupy brought a lot of relief supplies and food and helped to feed their people who were starving. So there were a lot of soldiers American soldiers that were quite compassionate towards the Japanese. Again, not to excuse, the violent measures earlier, but it was quite different from what they expected the Americans would do when occupying their country. So what occurred to me at this point is like, oh, all of those hundreds of women that committed suicide, thinking that they were going to be raped and tortured or killed, and actually that was propaganda by the militarists. That's what Suzuki Roshi calls them, the militarists, the people that were pushing for war and escalation and fighting. So, and I'm sure that we had them on our side too. I mean, it's like the people pushing for war versus trying to seek a peaceful resolution. Oh, and then there's more. Okay, well, this is just a little bit of his personal experience. So yeah, I was not purged after the war. Who would like to read that? Anyone? Okay, go ahead, Megan.
I was not purged after the World War. I had no record of supporting the military, and I had many printed documents expressing my feelings. Many papers suggesting what our policies should be, what kind of danger the nation was in. Most of this may be difficult for Americans to understand. I didn't say anything about war. I said that if we neglected to understand Japan's situation clearly, if we based our understanding merely on what was broadcast or printed, then we would lose the real picture of Japan. I cared more about the fundamental way of thinking that causes war. That is why I didn't like the nationalists in Japan. Their view was very one-sided and unrealistic. They brought accusations against others without knowing what they were doing. They created tremendous problems. So I put the emphasis on studying what was actually happening in the country, in the army, and in the political world.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, so this again illustrates that he's not even talking about war, where everyone's talking about whether the war is good or bad. He's talking about our thinking being one-sided, and that we need to think for ourselves and not just be fed whatever the media puts out there. So he's expressing that we need to, use our brains and understand what's going on and find answers for ourselves. And so he's tackling the underlying problem of going with the flow, which ultimately led to war. And then he says over here, wherever you go, if you have a flexible attitude, you can help people quite easily. Wherever you go, if you have a flexible attitude, you can help people quite easily.
This reminds me of the portion that we read last week, where he was finding a way to get things accomplished just by his flexibility. He did the impossible, getting Taro to back to Japan with him.
Yep.
So, this was his, this really describes the essence, I think, of his approach.
Yep, I agree. So
Lee, I was thinking about that passage from last week all week, and in fact, there's this section, the part that really resonated with me was where he said that if we're supported on the inside, then everything else on the outside will support us as well. And I really think that's kind of the heart of what our practice is, waking up to your true self, the real self that is not hindered by what your nationality tells you, your society tells you. And I think it was a little bit problematic last week that some people interpret it more as, oh, Suzuki was optimistic that he was going to make it back to Japan. And I think terms like optimistic, pessimistic, these opposite words, they can be very problematic in our practice. And I think it's like he says right here, he's very flexible. He has the ability to wake up and see it for exactly what it is, that he was able to cut through what his nation was telling him, his government was telling him. He could see the situation for exactly what it is. And, this has really been like a great teaching piece for me with all this quarantine going on right now. We look and we see people in our community, they're very attached to this pessimism right now. And they're so attached to it that that's why they're going to the store and they're buying 100 reams of toilet paper and things that you really don't need it. And on the flip side, we see some people who have they're attached to this unfounded optimism too. We see all these teenagers going to Florida right now. Oh, I'm young, statistics that I can see, I'm not affected, and they're hurting other people. And I think if we're really grounded in our practice right now and we can really wake up and see what the situation is, our job becomes super clear. We can stay at home, we can help the people who are at risk. We can do this social distancing, step out of the way so that we can do our part and contribute to our society, that we're not going to spread this. So yeah, this section just really, really resonated with me, especially that, if you're strong with yourself on the inside, everything on the outside will support that. And especially where he said if our temple is failing the people, it's because our dharma is weak. So, you know, that, Bonnie, that one question that you posed earlier, what is the role of spiritual practice in a time of crisis? Is to keep our dharma strong.
I think one thing about the buying, I don't know if that's necessarily pessimistic thinking, but I think it's just like fear. People are panicking. But I think that when the fear sets in, they're not able to think about the community because they're only thinking about themselves. And I think ultimately we have to work together to, you know, like if everyone else is dying because they're starving, if I have a lot of food, what does it matter? Everyone else is dead, you know? So I think it's good to try to think about not just ourselves. It's especially hard right now because we're so isolated, you know, because we're not seeing other people. So maybe other people don't feel that real to us right now.
Yeah, I was always impressed with Zen Buddhism's sort of doing away with this optimism, pessimism duality and being more realistic as opposed to optimistic or pessimistic. I think one thing that it seems to emphasize to me, and I'm not an expert in Zen Buddhism, sort of knowing very strong, knowing how to act in a situation that is a way to act that is conducive to the community at large. So through meditation practice, if I understand correctly, Zen Buddhism, that's how we achieve this discernment of how to act right in any situation and sort of achieve the confidence that we can really, that Suzuki Roshi was talking about, that we can sort of see things for what they are and not sort of make these misjudgments like going to getting a lot of toilet paper, you know.
Well, also an emphasis on like the Sangha and the community kind of, and trying to put effort into the well-being of other people.
And I think that comes naturally when you understand interdependence and you understand how much our well-being and livelihood depends on the well-being of people around us. But when you don't understand that and you think it's me versus them, when the individualistic mindset comes in, which usually yields unsustainable results, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the whole idea with Buddhism is like we're not separate. There's no Bonnie, there's no me, you know, like, so trying to kind of break down those ideas.
Yeah, there's interdependence, right? That I mean, there is my own individual experience, but it doesn't exist separate from you. Like I couldn't exist if you didn't exist. It's a understanding how tightly woven we really are. I mean, if anything, I think the coronavirus is making it clear, like, how is it being spread? Oh, by the air we breathe, right? That just shows how connected we've been all along through the elements of air and water and just haven't been paying attention to it. You know, that's how connected we really are.
And I've seen a lot of things that are saying, you know, like these people who take the food to the market, or our doctors, these people who are performing these really critical things in these times, those are the people we should be rewarding, you know, and or respecting too and applauding.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the people in the medical field are definitely in the front lines, as well as a lot of people delivering our groceries and things.
Yeah.
I think rewarding, what you're trying to say, Columbine, is rewarding in the way that they need to be taken care of too. Because they themselves need to be given a break. They themselves need to be made sure that they're fed, they're taken care of, so they can keep doing what they're doing. And that is, personally, I think that's a very good idea.
I think it's going to be interesting. I suspect that with this shutdown, there's going to be some major economic impacts. And I know this is going to be a big burden or hardship on, you know, welfare, Medi-Cal, all these kind of government programs. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be needing them. And I hope that we can do our best to provide, but I worry that it's just going to be overwhelmed by lots of people. So I'm worried about that.
How do you think Suzuki Roshi would respond to this virus crisis?
Good question.
I think what he did, I mean, after everything he went through, he maintained his composure. I feel like that calmness, that inner calmness that he has, despite everything going around him, he just stayed very centered, very seated. And I think his ability to see that with such clarity, he would be able to do that today. And I think for us, I think the lesson is today is really staying in that calm state of mind and not going out crazy and buying all those toilet paper rolls. So if you don't have toilet paper, it's okay. You can make do with other things.
Well,
Yeah.
I was wondering, I don't know when he was born, but you know, there was the Spanish flu in 1918, I think. I don't know if he was a child then. He must have lived through it though.
He probably was a child.
Okay.
Well, he died in 1971, and I think he was he 61?
67.
Oh,
He was quite young then. So
Yeah, he was quite young actually.
okay.
when he
Yeah,
died.
but it sounds like with the Spanish flu, it was very similar to what's happening now. So it just got kind of buried over in history because World War I and II kind of took over in history, but we can look back and learn a lot from it, I think.
Yeah.
The Spanish flu had 3 waves.
Right.
last 2
Yeah.
years. Yes.
That's what they were talking about was, you know, we're going to go back to normal eventually, but then what if there's like another wave?
That's
So
right.
hopefully we can learn from that. I'm hoping they can come up with a vaccine at a certain point.
yeah, they are testing. Actually, my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, they're busy manufacturing basically coronavirus RNA to go to all these labs to test, and the labs, all of these researchers are trying to develop a vaccine. So that's one of the things they're doing to try to understand it better. So people are working on it. Having said that, even if a vaccine comes out, you know, they have to usually go through many months of testing. So we're going to be in this for a while. But I think I want to go back to a couple points that Nick made that we've also kind of talked about a few times, is that what Suzuki Roshi did and what the practice encourages us to do is to see things clearly. So I think we can see clearly, like, this virus is here and it's very real. You know, we're not going to just be in denial about it, but at the same time, we're not going to panic, because our practice is to take care of things. Our practice is to take care of life, and we value life. We value human life. We value animal life. We value plant life. I mean, Zen is about valuing life. And so just doing what we need to do to take care of life, both the sustainability of human life, but also the quality of life. And that's part of staying connected, is our quality of life, right? So I don't know what Suzuki Roshi would do, but I'm pretty sure he would still be practicing, you know, harder than ever. He would still be meditating. He would still be doing what he can to see things as clearly as possible. Because as he said, there's no formula, there's no recipe for what you should do. The only thing you can do is practice seeing things clearly without being caught up in emotions or caught up in fear or panic. Just see things as clearly as possible, then you can have the best chance of seeing clearly what is the best thing to do.
Goes back to your point on propaganda about who to listen to and who not to listen to. I mean, there's certain authorities that are telling us what to do that aren't really informed. Just like the militarists in Japan said one thing, certain authorities are saying erroneous things.
Yep.
Me personally, I like to trust people who are experts in this field, who have credentials, and like virologists and people who are doctors, and do what they say to do to stop spreading the virus, like self-isolate, wash your hands, don't touch your face, that sort of thing.
So if someone tells you, Mike, to eat a bunch of aquarium cleaning tablets and make you better, you won't fall for it.
Oh no, that's exactly the opposite of what I'm saying. I'm saying you don't.
No, I'm just joking. That was a joke. Apparently, yeah, someone told people to do that and it didn't work. They died. So, yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I've noticed with this, because everything's been shut down, it kind of feels like every day is Saturday. And so I've had a lot more time to just, cook and take my time when I'm, washing the dishes. And so in a way that's really nice. But the social distancing thing is really hard for me. I mean, it's lovely to see all your faces, but I would prefer it to be in real life.
Yeah.
Well, Lee and I have been going out for walks every day, and we get to see we get to see our neighbors from like streets down from us, and they're also walking, but we keep our distance. So a lot more people are out. They're going on walks. People are doing things outside, and
but it's hard because I go hiking every day, and there's people I see, and generally we we'll high five or we'll give each other a hug, and we can't do that anymore.
Do that, yeah.
But you can just wave from a distance and say hello.
Yeah.
Give them a smile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's still a feeling there, and the feeling doesn't go away. And this is, we say hello and hi to everybody who we come across, and it's just like the strangest thing that I've been noticing for the past week since we've been going on walks is people are becoming more and more friendlier. It's like people are actually looking at each other and so waving to each other. Nobody's looking into their phones. People are actually looking at each other. So there is something.
It really does feel like people have slowed down a lot. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, and the other thing that Lee was reading was that the environment has actually become clear.
Yeah.
There's less smog in the world. There's less people, putting out.
No traffic.
Yeah, so it's like the Earth is really doing really well right now. So we also have to look at what is happening, and if there is something that we can take away from all of this, is the fact of the matter that we are human beings and we need to look at each other and acknowledge each other. And that's the most important thing. And we should keep that. And it's a good thing that you're doing. You go on hikes. We're doing the same thing every day. We take a different path every day for that reason,
And I think eventually we might be able to do some group hikes as Kannon, but I think we'll have to keep some physical distance. But I think that's probably how we'll start when we do start gradually coming back, is doing things outside, meeting in the garden, going for a walk where it's ventilated and there's space and in smaller groups. So I think we will get there eventually.
Yeah.
We will definitely get through, this will pass in its own good time, but I think that things will begin to improve.
For some reason, I'm actually happy for the Mother of Earth. I just feel like finally can
a break, right?
take a break.
Yeah.
And then, because there's a lot of as a mother, well, I have a school age kids, and actually I find they are aspiring, and then they don't care. I don't know. I mean, there's no school now. They have to adjust this completely new learning environment online. Everything is online. They seem to they don't complain, and then they just do 1 hour after another, and then if sometimes they feel lonely, and then they want to meet their friends, and then sometimes we just arrange a play date online, so they can see each other, they can talk to each other. But their spirit was just so fresh. They just say, yay, okay, if something is the same as before, it's okay. It's not, it's okay, also okay. I'm like,